Chairman, my colleague commentators, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here. What I will do, I think you can all see the screen, and to make yourself comfortable with your chair, you can turn around or whatever makes you comfortable. What we will try and focus on this is quite a bit on climate change, and we'll try and see how regional cooperation might be one of the responses to this very complex phenomenon that we are facing, and very challenging indeed. So without much ado, let me move a bit fast. I'm trying to set the scene, so there are a number of issues to be covered, so let me move very fast on this one. What I want to cover here is some of the genuine concerns. Why are we so concerned about climate change? And climate change used to be perceived, when the problem started 20 years ago, from the Rio process, the Art Summit process. That's where the convention, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, was signed virtually by most governments at that time, all governments by now. And over a period of time, what has emerged is that it's probably the greatest, not only environmental issue, the greatest development issue that is challenging us in terms of crisis, disasters, management, challenging other aspects of development. So it's a development issue in it. And it has implication on disaster, poverty, sea level rise, and human security. I'll get into that one. I'll talk a little more about regional cooperation and what possible responses we might have. So that is now the key concerns. Why we are so activated, the global community as a whole, and why some of the things cannot be done in terms of solution as easily, needs to be understood. Climate change is the greatest threat that humanity faces today, and we must understand that it is a global phenomenon. Its root is based on the greenhouse gases. Some of the molecules, those are in tiny amounts in the atmosphere, but they have this special property that they hold back the infrared radiation, which warms the molecules themselves up, and when the trillions of molecules get warmed up, the whole atmosphere warms up a bit. And how much is a bit? It is said that we have reached around between 0.86 to 0.9 degrees centigrade from the pre-industrial period till about now. We might have crossed 0.9, and what all the governments of all the countries have agreed in Copenhagen, subsequently follow up in Cancun in the 17th conference of the party, that 2 degrees centigrade is the maximum that we can tolerate in making our present economic system function, present ecological system function without major disruptions. But that may not be true. The least developed countries, the small island developing states, they have said that we should try to keep it constrained within 1.5 degrees up to the end of the present century. Now, some thinkers and calculators and scientists think that we have crossed both those limits quite some time ago, and we are talking of 3 degrees to 4 degrees, which is really what is called the fry-pan syndrome, where things will get so hot that our production system, our management system of rivers, waters, all those, particularly disaster, will occur in such frequency that we would not have the capacity to handle that. So that's a serious threat. That's where it comes from. Most of the phenomenon will be visible in terms of local experiences. So Though this phenomenon, the greenhouse gas, has been emitted in the initial period by the presently industrialized countries, and that's what the convention, even convention is based on, calling those countries Annex 1, and with a special list, basically all the OECD countries, and others who are now coming, as you know, in the last discussion in Durban, the emerging countries, the major emerging countries, industrial power, which are called the basic countries, in China, India, South Africa, Brazil, Argentina, major developing and rapidly developing countries, are also contributing significantly. These developed countries contribute obviously least, but they are going to suffer the most. And Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries to the study of climate change. And how vulnerable, this idea of being the most vulnerable country remains one of the challenges of both calculation. Otherwise, recently there has been a report by the Asian Development Bank where they have again asserted that Bangladesh is the most affected country and most impacted country. And I'll try and explain that in a very short passage so that audience here and international audience can understand it. The key impacted areas are going to be agriculture, food security, water and health, resource space and livelihood, infrastructure, rural, urban development, i.e. all aspects of economic and ecological processes, and climate change will affect the poor disproportionately because the poor have the least capacity to handle the consequences of climate change. What have I done? I need to move forward. Yeah. So, climate change undermines the development goals, and food, water, health, energy, livelihood all will be affected badly, and urgent actions are needed by all partners, government, NGOs, civil society, all actors in terms of food, water, health, energy, disaster risk reduction, livelihood social program, and what now we are talking about is climate resilient development, a development that allows us to go. And regional cooperation is envisaged to be one of the approaches towards that. Energy, water, energy development, water management, infrastructure, connectivity of trade, the so-called green economy, which is basically a low-carbon economy that has to be looked into so that we lower the carbon loading or the greenhouse gas loading in our system. Where will be the impact felt most? In many areas, but human beings at the community level, human beings across, but at the community level that we felt most. Enterprise and economic activities all across. Ecosystem, natural resource management, environment, and institutions and organizations. When that happens, not much is left. So we have serious consequences of that. What I will do in the few minutes is zoom through what is happening in Bangladesh, and we talk of 11 major challenges of Bangladesh in terms of climate change. Some of them are regional within the area of Bangladesh. Some of them are generic, but I'll go through them quickly. Sea level rise is one such major one. Cyclones, as we all know, see the either happen, and deeper penetration of salt water, I'll explain. Erratic rainfall not coming in time. Flood, intensity, frequency, droughts, riverbank erosion, impacts on Chittagong hill tracts, the hilly regions, then water health, food security and livelihood, all that will be going on. What I will show you is, this is the map of Bangladesh, and what the red line you see is the line of 1 meter level from the sea, so 1 meter sea level. Now, if there is 1 meter sea level rise, and it is said that probably we have reached 28 to 38 centimeter of sea level already, and 1 meter is predicted to be by the end of the century. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said 86 centimeter. That's already been discarded as outdated because it hasn't taken much of the ocean melting of the glaciers in the polar regions into account. But what happens really is that our map will change in a modified way. I'm making a very simplistic version of that. For 1 meter sea level rise, Bangladesh will do anything like that, which is territorial loss, which has severe implication for the communities out there. And you can imagine there are areas within that area which have, well, boulders have been built, protection has been created. They will be safe up to a point, but since surrounding many areas will not be getting the benefit, we have problems. Now, in terms of cyclone, our recent experiences, the Naldis that did not hit Bangladesh but did hit Myanmar had killed 160,000 plus minus 10,000 people in Myanmar. So it can be absolutely disastrous. What is interesting is such a cyclone hit Bangladesh, about 6 to 10,000 people will die, not 160,000, because our cyclone disaster preparedness and management system has improved so much that it is becoming example in the world. Nonetheless, we have problems. So the cyclone is affecting us far more frequently than it is supposed to. We have each of these mega cyclones, now this is approximately 20-year events, so the possibility they should be coming. Those three should have happened over 60 years, but have happened over 2 years. So that really is an enormous challenge. And the green line you see on the left side, right side of yourself in the map is the area that gets often affected by cyclones. The pink are the ones when sea level rise has taken place or is taking place, salt water will be pumped further in, and there will be new areas that will be inundated with salt water, and hence decreasing productivity. Now, erratic rainfall, what is happening now when we ask the farmers across the world, not in terms of climate change, but what is happening to your life. Then whether it's Asia, Africa, or America, we hear one thing, something isn't right. In Bengali, the farmers say, "Kemon jeno shob aule geche." Something isn't right in their life, the rain isn't coming at the right time, at the time of the cropping, so there is a disjuncture that is going to happen much seriously between the crop production period and the rainfall, which will disjoint our productivity, and we have a problem. And this is quite well known in many parts of the world. Anything that you see blue, whether they are shining or not, is flood. At 2004, that amount of flood areas have been affected. So our flood is increasing something to the order of 10 to 15% over the last 15 years, and it's sort of figure of 12% has been floated around. Now, the reason of this is that we have a very complex system. Bangladesh is at the end of a very complex system sandwiched between the Himalayas and the Indian Ocean, particularly Bengal. And Himalaya is the water tower, Bangladesh coastal area is the water sink. That's where a huge amount of water comes and goes. And many of you might know that the amount of water that passes through Bangladesh, only 8% of that falls vertically as rainfall or precipitation in Bangladesh. 92% comes from outside the major rivers of Meghna, Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna basins. So it is this unique geography that makes it so complicated, and we are dominated by the floodplain, and the Himalayan drainage ecosystem is what we call this whole area, and there is an interplay between the mountains and the floodplains through the mechanism of water. And Gangotri Glacier, the little pink map, is a glacier that has been receding, and it has receded more than 5 kilometers already over the period, though there are a number of discussions how exactly, how precise, etc. But nonetheless, the decision, and large number of new lakes, which are not geological lakes formed over the millions of years, but over the last 100 years, has been formed in Bhutan, Nepal, India, Pakistan, China, and this is very evident now, and this is showing the impacts. Now, with the flood frequency, a flood around every 20 years, a big flood should be happening. In the last 10 years, 2 major floods of that magnitude has already happened. That has taken us, and anything you see red in this map is what is riverbank erosion. Our river banks are unstable. That has nothing to do with the geological nature of the formation of this river. The earlier stage of formation in deltaic systems, but some of them are stable, some of them are not stable, as the river bank is being eroded because of the hydrodynamic behavior increasing, and this has been one of the challenges. Just one number. About 1/3 of Dhaka's residents live in our slums. 1/3 of that 1/3, if you talk to them, they say they have some linkage to river banking erosion for which they have been displaced. So there are links with that. This is the drought situation, as you know, northwest of Bangladesh, which is the Burning Tract, Russia area. That's a bit much more dry, and drought is increasing. Anything in the red you see is first map is the existing drought, second map is by 2030, third is 2075. So anything red will be increasing in drought in those areas. Our most recent literature shows that in Territorial hill tracts, the rain, same amount of rain more or less will happen, but will be condensed over a shorter period of time, which means that there will be greater amount of water flow over a shorter period, giving rise to local floods and also erosion of the topsoil. Our mountains, our hills are not rocks, they're topsoil, and that will be gone, which has been extremely affected. And the temperature rise and all that will take place. I will go through that quickly. This is just a modeling map to show that those effects will take place both in rainfall and in temperature. Health. A number of health hazards have been identified. Malaria is increasing, dengue is increasing, diarrheal disease is increasing, and in diarrheal disease there are two peaks. One is a drought peak and one is a flood peak, and both of them are increasing, though we have had the miracle cure of diarrhea, which is this saline solution that we know, which has decreased the mortality. But the morbidity, the number of events happening continues to increase while we have successfully managed mortality in a big way. There are other areas. One example is higher blood pressure due to taking too much of salt water in the coastal area. We have found a number of hotspots, Dhaka being one, where women have been shown to have higher blood pressure than the national background, and these women have we are now with Imperial College following up some of these women, and many of them are suffering from what is called eclampsia, pre-eclampsia, those who are pregnant because of the too much salt water, which is giving rise to blood pressure. Food security will be certain, and in terms of intergovernmental panel on climate change, by 2050, there will be a loss in 8% in rice and 32% wheat. But this is assuming business as usual, as if we don't do anything. But that's not the case. We are doing a lot. New variety of salt-tolerant variety of rice has been found, discovered by our scientists. People are trying to do things, so a lot is happening. Now, in terms of development, this is one of the things that climate signals dominate as if temperature is the main signal, which, as I said, global warming, so temperature is the main signal. But in terms of development, it will be the extreme events. That will be the biggest signal. So, extreme events being cyclones, floods, disasters, shorter hot spells, urban centers will be affected, and many of these. So, in terms of slight theoretical understanding, the total impact of this event is managed by the intensity of the event. And if climate change is the event, intensity is based on the amount of greenhouse gas. As we know, greenhouse gas, Bangladesh almost has very, very little responsibility. Bangladesh per capita greenhouse gas emission by Bangladesh is 1/6 that of India, 1/20th that of the United States, and 1/11th of that of the global average. So we don't contribute anything. We call it angel scenario. All the Bangladeshis become angel tomorrow, stop breathing. How much contribution can we stop in greenhouse gas emission? Almost nothing. So we are not a cause, but we have the greatest impact. So the intensity of the event is due to greenhouse gas caused by others. The baseline condition is the development parameter in a cyclone is the poor who die because they don't have the right infrastructure, they don't have the housing, they don't have enough food, disaster management capability, many of them are non-literate, etc. And so the most important response that we are left with is what we are calling adaptive capacity. The capacity to adapt and adaptation would be required because the mitigation, which is the reduced greenhouse gas that was supposed to be done by all the countries together, has not happened. The Kyoto Protocol was intended to reduce by 5% from the 1990 baseline. So anything before 1990, somebody can say, we don't understand it, we didn't know it, but nobody can say after 1990 that we do not know it. We have enough understanding after that. So, even if we start serious reduction today, much of the intensity of impact has been built in. For example, sea level rise will not stop if we dramatically stop decreasing of greenhouse gas that are going to be over hundreds of years. So this has been built in, we need to adapt. And adaptation is the way forward. Bangladesh has already got its own National Adaptation Program of Action and the Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy Action Plan. India has got a plan, we'll talk about it quickly. So what is happening is, if this is a general progress over time and the development of this way, then a natural line follows. But if there is a disaster, that disaster takes the whole development back and in time. One doesn't go back in time, but one loses out of development. So on the average family, this is what really happens is, this amount of loss is what we see happening because of extreme events. Much of it will be induced by climate change. So our development parameter, talking in terms of dollars saved by a family, will be reduced, so they won't be able to develop as much. There has been tremendous efforts by the government, by the non-government community, private sector. A lot of development is taking place across the world, particularly in Bangladesh, but nonetheless, the ordinary people are suffering more. So to get out of poverty line, it's just no point just saying microcredit isn't working, this safety net is not working. It's the whole area of health impact risks, the disasters that it forces us to remain below the poverty line. So what is really happening is we are below, every disaster hits, here's the health hazard which forces a family to be below the poverty line. So what we want to do is, that line shows business as usual development, despite all the problems Bangladesh is developing. So is many other countries. What happens is, this red dotted line is where, because climate change will suppress development. What we really want is that line, which is called climate smart development, which will compensate our development parameters. We have to plan, we have to program in a way so that we do that. And this is what we are now talking about, the climate smart adaptation benefits. If we can adapt properly, institutional and otherwise, and I'm trying to show how. Water security, food security, livelihood security, health and energy security are major concerns for the country. Across the political barrier, there is absolutely no disagreement between political parties or otherwise that poverty is the central issue. So there is an agreement. Right now there is a second agreement that climate change threatens us all and we must do a lot about it immediately. So all these are linked with poverty and each is affected by climate change. So this cycle and much of the impact will be visible in the realm of water. Too much water, 60-70% of the global impact will be visible in terms of water. Too much impact is, too much water is flood, too little water is drought, wrong type of water, salt water coming in, penetrating, and wrong timing of water will just severely affect agricultural productivity. So those are some of the major threats. This is just to show the various linkages, and I will move a bit faster. Going into human insecurities is often human security that are defined in terms of a strategic or military security, but right now, human insecurity through climate change becomes one of the major global threats. Food, water, health, livelihood and social security will be threatened by climate change, and climate change is regarded is degrading all ecosystems which are affecting the human system, particularly the poor across the world. Now, The loss of Bangladesh territorial water, if it was invaded by somebody, we would have raised and sent our armies and given our lives and do all the sorts of things. But this is a slow process that will happen and already is happening. If you go to the coastal area, hundreds of thousands of households are raising their plates. They don't do it because they don't understand, because they are seeing that things are happening, their level is increasing. Maldives, as many of you know, that for 1 meter and around there, Maldives will virtually disappear. Where will these people go? So it's a loss of sovereignty. And in Rio process, one of the questions that was asked, what is the sole business of the United Nations? And after huge conference of top people, it was decided that protecting sovereignty of sovereign states, member states, is the sole purpose of United Nations. Now when a country disappears, the sovereignty disappears with it. And that challenges the whole notion of United Nations and its purpose. And we do not have as yet a water-based state. We are all thinking of what is the state. We think of a small piece of land with some people, a flag, and hence we are the state. And can be a member of United Nations. So that's one of the challenges. I don't want to go into this. This is much more on the security issue, but basically climate change will affect the basic securities, and one of the impact of that would be human migration, because some people will be displaced. And there will be mostly internal migration, some external migration that will give rise to future conflicts. Now let me get into the regional cooperation issue. SAARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, has a number of climate change declarations, and let me say a bit cautiously that SAARC is good at making declarations, not so good at follow-up of activities of those declarations. So nonetheless, there has been a number of declarations. The Dhaka Declaration in 2008 says a number of things, but recognizes that SAARC region is most vulnerable to climate change. They were thinking of focusing on agriculture productivity, keeping the vital infrastructure, and limiting our development options for the future. So a number of discussions have been taken place, and it says that to inculcate the habits towards low carbon society, just take an example, enhance South-South cooperation of technology and development, to do what is called pre-development mechanism or economic tools. So various options, including adaptation science, based knowledge system, etc., etc. So there has been declaration. In 2010, there was the 16th SAARC summit, in which the environment ministers agreed to focus on water management and conservation, develop cooperative projects at the regional level. Easier said than done, but capacity building and transfer of technology between eco-friendly systems and eco-friendly conservation of aquatic ecosystem, regular and systemic sharing of scientific data. A number of commitment has been made, and this goes on. They asked for the early ratification of the SAARC Convention on Cooperation and Environment, and the further negotiation on early finalization of SAARC agreement of rapid response to natural disasters. So there has been commitment. Now in 2011. In Atiq, in Maldives, there has been a declaration on alleviate poverty, reduce income inequalities, improve, and the last one is conscious of the environmental degradation, particularly vulnerability of the region to the threat of climate change. So, Asian countries are going to be one of the most affected areas. But Asian countries vary widely in economic development, socio-cultural practices, in climate vulnerability, in adaptive capacity, technology management. So a uniform agreement or process will not be easy, but in the two major blocks that we have, SAARC and ASEAN, and now an emerging group which cuts across those with the least developed countries, with the small island developing states, some of the poor countries of Africa which are not least developed. Together they are forming the most vulnerable country forum, which has been formed. There was a declaration opened by Prime Minister in Dhaka a few months ago, there was a meeting in Durban, very big one. So it's sort of slowly walking into the system. It will be difficult because of the structures, United Nations structure of the system of negotiation, but regional efforts in climate change and development action is still very low. There are some opportunities, both inter-country and inter-region. So there are by inter-region, I mean South and ASEAN working together, because it's a much more complicated and vast system. So what is the opportunity for Asia in combating climate change? Climate change affects all countries in Asia, but coastal, island states, hilly and mountain regions are going to be more severely affected. So there can be clusters around those. Some attempts are already being made at the level of hill and mountains through groups like Ishimont and others. Poor are most vulnerable within the society, and there are 3-4 areas where we can do much better with collaboration, cooperation. One is the energy issue based on hydropower in this region. If we optimally behave with each other, which is quite difficult, but then there can be whole issue of energy through hydropower can be addressed much more successfully. Renewable energy and energy sharing, common grid across South Asia, sharing across borders in energy makes it much more sensible. The whole concept of green economy, which is the theme of Rio +20, is being discussed and can include low carbon development. Even in a country like Bangladesh, you know, if we change all the bulbs by efficient fluorescent bulbs, which is happening now, then we need not have any more new electricity generation, though we need to have still quite a bit to go. So there are opportunities there. Connectivity amongst countries between SAARC and ASEAN will enable infrastructure development and communication in information technology that will be discussed here later, and for disaster risk reduction and food security in the area, complementary cooperation between countries. Many of you might know, 3 years ago, there was a huge increase in the global food price, and virtually the rice market of the world had disappeared. India said they were not going to sell anything but basmati. Thailand at that point said they didn't want to come to the global market for rice. Vietnam didn't have enough to come in. So we had money, but not rice to buy in the market. So there would be crises. Cooperation between SAARC and ASEAN countries is very vital. SAARC as a region is high on declaration but low on follow-up, and disaster management, particularly that should be flood and cyclone preparedness, will give us some opportunities, and Bangladesh is one of the leaders in this. Not so much in flood management in terms of huge preparedness, but flood is also a lot of work has been done. But cyclone management, we have been world leaders, and there can be progress made. Just one example, there has been a very big cyclone in Orissa about 5 years ago, and our estimates show that if the same cyclone happened in Bangladesh, about 1/3 would get hit, 2/3 would be saved by better methodologies that Bangladesh has been experiencing. Water, food security and energy security, this is of high potential. And this is where highest amount of collaboration, cooperation is possible, but we need leaders to do that, and low carbon development economy. So cooperation with SAARC and ASEAN in the area of REDD. REDD is the forestry which then can be operated for absorbing carbon, and SAARC is ahead in certain areas of disaster risk reduction. So while the cooperation, knowledge and technology exchange, economic cooperation, market cohesion and green economy, climate technologies, adaptation and mitigation. So ADMIC means adaptation and mitigation together, food security, regional food bank, etc. So urgent cooperation has been happening and should need to happen at the level of adaptation, mitigation, technology and funding. Funding will be mostly global, and national policies are already happening. Bangladesh has, as I said, has NAPA and the Climate Change Strategy Action Plan. Nepal has National Adaptation Plan, Program of Action, local plans already evolving. India has its own national plan, and NAMA is the nationally appropriate mitigation actions that's happening, and the whole issue of displaced people will have to be done through climate migration. I'll skip this just to say that climate-induced potential migration has had a number of conferences all over the world, meetings through the UN. So this is now getting some traction in discussion, and it is perfectly in a serious condition that this is something going to happen. Now, people don't want to get out. So our study shows that most people are reluctant to move. They want to move to proximate cities. They want to move to their own country, but there will be a degree of international movement that will be required. And managing this migration would be one of the major challenges. We are calling it now planned migration. And how this migration will take place? Well, one of the proposals now, and it's just a proposal, nothing has been started discussion, is those countries who have emitted most, and there can be whole arithmetic and calculation, they will have to take the displaced people. If the numbers that IPCC talks about, another 300 million people will be displaced across the world, and those rich countries will have to take those people. There are whole systems, and we can discuss it later. And Durban and beyond, governance and fund management remains one of the issues. Critical right to development and the right type of development, which is now a question of what we have. And in the onset, Rio Plus 20, higher commitment still on and lower action, but green economy and institutional reform is talked about. Climate change will not be a central issue there, but just to conclude that climate change is real today and poses great threat to our humanity as a whole. Integration of climate change in development at all levels is a must. South-ASEAN greater cooperation in adaptation mitigation and possible, but adaptation has limits. It cannot be continued to adapt. We have limitations. Once a system has collapsed, people have moved out, ecosystem cannot produce anymore. That is the end of adaptation. So mitigation is the must. We must mitigate to reduce the pressure on adaptation, and government, NGOs, private sector must all work together across countries, between countries, within countries to get to that. Thank you very much.